equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child and sibling loss. This is the Hope After Child and Sibling Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you'll hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. I'm Greg Bufkin, your host and one of the co-founders of the Empty Chair Endeavor. To learn more about us, please visit our website at www.emptychairendeavor.com. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Greg Bufkin, and on this episode, I'll be talking with my guests, Bobby and Gabby Bisterfeldt. While the same last name would at least imply that they're married, in fact, they're father-in-law and daughter-in-law, with Gabby being married to Bobby's son, Caleb. Now, stories like this are somewhat rare, but really important and need to be shared. Gabby has experienced the devastating loss of both a brother and sister, while Bobby has experienced the loss of two of his brothers. The death of a sibling is often profoundly traumatic, and it's devastating, but in our culture, somewhat marginalized or even overlooked. Not surprisingly, surviving siblings are known as the forgotten mourners. That's a topic we'll be exploring a little later in this episode. These folks soon discover that there are very few resources available to them to help them process and navigate their grief journey. After experiencing this themselves, Bobby and Gabby sensed God calling them to do something about it. And in early 2025, they founded Sibling Lifeline Retreat to, quote, provide a compassionate Christian-focused setting to continue to provide healing in your grief journey and to build connections with other siblings who have experienced sibling loss, end of quote. These are biblically based, and they're offered at absolutely no cost to attendees. I believe this to be a very uniquely important and vital ministry that you'll be learning more about in our conversation. And now, here's my conversation with Bobby and Gabby. Well, Bobby and Gabby, welcome to our podcast today. It is so good to have you guys and to finally meet you face to face, not for our listeners, but just for me and just for them. So welcome to our podcast today, guys.
Thank you for having us.
It's an honor, Greg.
Oh, yeah. Well, Bobby, the honor is mine. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while because as I said in the introduction a few minutes ago, you guys have a very unique ministry, and you also have two very unique stories because you've suffered some significant loss in your lives. And I love that you guys are you represent two different seasons of life. And before we go any further, too, for our listeners, I do want to acknowledge that Bobby is a serving member of our armed forces. He serves in the Air Force and is in military intelligence. So I do want to say thank you publicly for your service, Bobby.
I appreciate that, Greg. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Well, listen, why don't you guys take a minute or two and just tell us anything that you'd like about yourselves, anything personal that you'd like to share, whether it be your family, what you guys do outside your ministry, that sort of thing. And then we'll just dive into your story.
Perfect. Well, my name is Gabby. I live in Edmond, Oklahoma, so it's just a little bit outside of Oklahoma City. I am married to my husband, Caleb, and we have two wonderful cats. I always like to tell people that. I am the youngest of 5 siblings. My 2 older siblings are in heaven, and then I have 2 older living brothers. And I am a store manager at Starbucks, so that takes up a lot of my time throughout the week. But outside of that, I also love to be outside. So anything I can be doing, like walking or running or just enjoying time outside, is something I love to do.
Yeah, that's great. And if I'm not mistaken, your husband's name is Caleb.
Yeah.
So Bobby's son.
Yes.
But that was also the name of one of your brothers, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah, I thought so. What are the chances?
I know, exactly.
That's very cool. And what about you, Bobby?
All right. So I live out in the country near Wichita, Kansas, and I come from a family of 5. I have 2 older sisters and then 2 brothers, one older, one younger. Both of them are in heaven. Married to my amazing wife, Amy, and we have 4 adult children. And like you said, Greg, I'm a senior enlisted leader in the Air Force there at McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita, Kansas. Really love what I do there. I love the mission, love the airmen. I keep busy watching sports, playing sports, especially going across base with the airmen. They keep me young. I got a trail outside our house, with about the country there that I walk daily, and just gives me an opportunity to reflect on the day, think about what's coming up in the coming days, and just spend some time with God. I have a real passion for volunteering on a local level, Wichita Children's Home, volunteer with them. And then on a national level, Make-A-Wish as a wish granter. I do that along with my wife. And then TAPS, which is Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. It's for military families that have lost a military member. And so a senior military mentor and group leader with the teenagers when we attend those seminars a couple times a year. And then also take out the airmen on outreach events and get them in the community with shelter, detention centers, and just love taking them out there. They're always, excited to go back and share a part of their story and just spend some time with the kids, playing games and just, making friendships. So that's a little bit about me, faith, family, and service.
That's great. And, I'm really sorry that you really don't have a whole lot to do.
Yeah.
My gosh. That is incredible that you have time for all of that.
Like I told Gabby before, it seemed like about 5 years ago, I was thinking, when you get to heaven, I really do truly believe that, one of the first things God's going to ask you is, what did you do for me?
Yeah.
And I think we all need to ask ourselves that question every day. What did we do for him? And look at that eternal impact and not just the temporary impact we have here.
And what a great testimony that is, and challenge that is to all of us that are listening. Well, guys, I love that your father-in-law and daughter-in-law, that is so incredibly unique, and you guys know that. But I love that you bring these 2 generations together to reach out to help other people who are grieving the same kind of losses that you guys have and still do. So let's talk a little bit about that. Gabby, why don't you mentioned a few minutes ago that you've got a brother and a sister in heaven. And so why don't you just tell us a little bit about them, and if you would like to share anything about those 2 stories, you are welcome to do that.
Yeah, of course. So like I said earlier, I am the youngest of all of my siblings. So my brother, Caleb, I was 12 whenever he went to heaven. And then my sister, I was 18 when she went to heaven. So there was a little bit of time in between, obviously, of those. But to me, both of my siblings, they were my older siblings. My sister was 16 years older than me. So by the time I was born, she was basically out of the house, and she had a family of her own, which obviously took up a lot of her time. But for me, she was truly someone that I looked up to in the fact of the kind of mother that I want to be, and the kind of sister and the kind of friend. It's always the impact that my sister had on me. And then my brother was a very protective brother.
Of course.
The ideal brother that you want to have. Really took care of us. My parents divorced when I was 10 years old, and my dad worked a lot of hours. My mom is a recovering alcoholic, but at that time she was really struggling with her addiction. And so my brother really had to step up and take care of us during that time. And that's something that I really cherish about him, is that he gave up a lot of his childhood to take care of us and the things that he didn't have to do to make sure, that we were cared for. And that just says a lot about who he was as a person and how much he loved and cared about other people. My brother passed away. Caleb passed away whenever he was 20 years old. So this was in 2014, in May of 2014. He had a sudden cardiac event in the shower and just kind of passed away instantly. It was something that went undetected for years, and we just didn't know about it. So that's what happened with him. And then my sister, she was on a keto diet. And so she was trying to lose some weight and just kind of, take a little bit better care of her health in that circumstance. But with the keto diet, it's pretty common to be malnourished because of lack of nutrients and things like that. And so me and my mom and my sister have the tendency of taking very hot baths. And that is just something we have done our entire lives. And so my sister was taking a bath, and she got out of the bath to get something and stood up too fast. And she ended up passing out and ended up drowning in the bath. And that was really hard because her 2 sons were the ones that found her.
How old were they at the time?
At that time, they would have been, 18. So 14 and 12.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And so that was really hard for me. That's obviously something, for one, you just don't want them to go through as well.
Sure.
And having to deal with the pain of that. So that's a little bit about my story and, my story about my siblings. Thank you for letting me share.
Well, yeah, thank you for your courage and your transparency to share all of that, Gabby.
Thank you.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that are connecting with your story because they've been through something very similar. Now, how about you, Bobby?
So I got two brothers in heaven. First brother, his name's Robert. Share the name with him, first name. He died 5 years before I was born. And so he was 2.5 years old when he died. What happened was, when he was at home, he had climbed upon a chair and found a handgun on the top of a refrigerator and fell down with the handgun, and it discharged and shot him in his head. Yeah, that was tragic. It's a very, very tragic story. My mom was home with him at the time, and so she found him. Didn't have a telephone, so went out to the street, flagged down a car, and that person took them to the hospital there in Ellsworth, Kansas. And he later entered the arms of Christ in heaven. That's really his story. And that story, I only had it told to me once. I was 18 years old and asked my mom what happened. And she told me the story. I knew at that point I would never ask her to tell that story again, just how much of an impact it had on her just to get that story out. But I really did need to know, because growing up, he really was just a photo on the wall and was just told, hey, that's your brother in heaven. Really never understood nor processed it really until my teenage years. And really between 16 and 25, Gabby, my parents divorced when I was a teenager. And really that processing didn't come out until that time to start to really fully process that death. But, he has one professional photo, and looking in, at the eyes of my 2.5-year-old brother, you can see just a wonderful, amazing spirit, as the eyes do really mirror the soul. And he was here on earth, he'd be a great guy. Awesome.
I'm sure.
Have him here. Can't wait to spend eternity with him, but definitely miss him.
So
that's a story of my first brother, Robert. Second story, so Carl, he was 35 years old when he went to heaven on May 30th of 2020. He died by suicide. So his story really starts, just a great kid growing up. I remember him. He was 10 years younger than I was. We had a lot of fun times together. He was ornery, but he was super funny. My wife even talks about, when he was, I think he was roughly, 10 or 12 or so when she met him, and just all the good memories of him growing up as a kid. Really great athlete. I loved to hunt, fish, really mechanically inclined, loved cars, loved working on them. Around maybe his mid-20s or so, alcoholism definitely played a part in his life. Eventually depression. There's family dynamics that happened early on in life that I believe affected him starting to drink and starting that depression route. He got into a car accident about a year before he took his own life. I remember at that point, that was probably the first time I thought in my mind and actually verbalized it to my mom and my aunt. This is a possibility. He may take his own life. He's in that state. Because after that car wreck, drinking and whatnot, it was a single car wreck. He lost his job, which he'd worked at a oil and gas company for almost 20 years, just loved working there, loved the people. And so he eventually went to rehab, came out of rehab, and for 5 months he lived. And those 5 months were some of the best 5 months I've had with him personally in years. Because when you're dealing with somebody who's an alcoholic and depression, it strains a relationship with everybody. But that 5 months was something special. And I'll end this part of the story with this. So when it was time for his funeral, we had, a memorial there at the cemetery. And then we went back to the funeral home open that up to, more friends and family. But the cemetery was mainly just 50 of us. And I was given the eulogy. And so I was talking with my mom and my sisters the night before. And I was talking with him how much Carl represented family, especially. He was all about family and renewal, thinking about that 5 months after he got out of rehab and how great that time with him was, talking about the Word of God again. He spent the night at our house a couple times, which was just unheard of, and just having a good time with them, thinking things were really up on the uptrend. But the last thing that I didn't come to terms with was redemption. And so that was something I still struggled with. I struggled with what does suicide mean for everyone? What does it mean for him? And so I didn't verbalize that, but I did talk about the other two. So the next morning, I'm about ready to leave for the cemetery for whatever reason. I know now. I don't believe in coincidences. God orchestrates. And I went to the mailbox to check the mail. And my church has a monthly Bible study. And sure enough, it was time for the monthly Bible study to arrive in the mail. I opened it up, and what was the Bible study? What was the name and title of it? It was Redemption. Right there and then, God told me, your brother Carl is redeemed by Jesus Christ, even with suicide involved, even by taking his own life. And I shared that that morning there at the cemetery with family and friends who were out there. And I hope it resonated with them as much as it resonated with me, because at that point, the chapter, that book was closed. And I've never thought nor asked for, about that again. Redemption piece, that's a done deal in my mind. He is redeemed.
I'm so glad you shared that, Bobby, because I think that's a question in the minds of a lot of people in the church who are, because of traditions and sometimes because of false beliefs when they're growing up, there is a fear that is the unforgivable sin. And we know it absolutely is not, because if you're sealed in Christ, you are sealed in Christ. It doesn't matter what it was that led to your death. Nothing can overcome what Jesus has already done. I think that when there's the question in your mind, it's hard to have settledness and peace as you are trying to process and walk out that grief. So I think it's important for people to understand that. If there's any confusion in your minds whatsoever, if you're listening today, and suicide has affected you, it affected us as well. We lost our 26-year-old son to suicide 10 years ago this year, actually. And so, those questions absolutely pop into your mind, and you want the assurance. And we know that Ryan, like your brother, is a believer, and we know that we'll see him again in heaven. And so, we're thankful that we can't undo what God's already done. But I love y'all's stories. Thank you for being so transparent about that. One of the things that I think is important for us to talk about today, because it's not only is it your ministry focus, but when a child dies, most commonly, all the attention goes to the parents, and understandably. But what often happens is that the surviving brother or sister is kind of left to deal with it themselves, because quite often, and you guys can speak to this, you don't want to put any more on your parents than they already have on their plate. Their grief, you can already see how heavy their grief is and what it does to their lives. So unfortunately, that sometimes leaves a grieving brother or sister nowhere to go, with nobody to talk with. Let's talk a little bit about what that was like for you guys and how you tried to process that and then tried to navigate that. Maybe you got more support than the average sibling does.
Yeah, so I can speak to that first. When my brother passed away, I will agree in the fact of feeling like, you don't want to add to your parents' plate. And that is something that I struggled with for a long time after my brother passed. And obviously, it was my dad and then my brothers in the household. And I not only struggled with my dad not wanting, for one, he couldn't talk about it. And then I didn't want to add to his plate being so young at that time. I was only 12. So at that time, I think about it a lot of, I didn't fully understand grief either. But then also my brothers were dealing with it differently than I was, and they didn't feel comfortable talking about it. And so for me, grief at that time felt very isolating, and like I couldn't really process it because I felt like I had nobody to talk to, because the last thing I wanted to do is bring up something that was so heartbreaking to my dad and also to my siblings at the same time.
Yeah.
When my sister passed away is when it reopened my grief for my brother, because I felt like I really understood grief a lot better at that time.
Yeah.
But
you were 18 at the time, right?
Yes. And so whenever my sister passed away, I kind of, and I know Bobby will speak to this too in just a second about kind of living in your parents' grief, but like not wanting to add to their plate and things like that. But whenever my sister passed away, I didn't really get time to grieve. And the fact of I was trying to be my mom's support system. Like I said earlier, she was in recovery or is in recovery. And so I knew when my sister passed away that was going to be really hard for her to stay sober. And so during that time, I felt obligated to take on all of her emotions and process everything for her because I didn't want her to relapse. And so for me, I felt like a delayed sense of grieving with my sister as well. And so it was a really interesting process because over, the last 4 years, I've really not only grieved my sister, but I've grieved my brother because I've delayed my grieving process for so long because I've taken on, not wanting to add to my parents' grief.
Yeah, that's a lot for a young person to try to experience, but then also to try to figure out how to navigate that, how to process that, while at the same time trying to comfort and support a grieving parent. There's a lot of dynamics involved there that can potentially make it pretty difficult for somebody like you,
right,
to be able to step back into some normalcy,
right,
and live your life again. What kind of support did you eventually get, Gabby? I mean, you're 18 years old. I know that you still needed somebody else to be able to lean on, right?
Right. So I was 18 and then my sister actually passed away 2 days before my birthday. So I guess really, 18 or 19, kind of the same.
Right.
In that
right.
circumstance. Yeah. For me, obviously, like I will say Bobby has been a great support system for me in the fact of I had nobody else up until that time frame of when my sister passed away that had lost a sibling. So for one, having Bobby in my life and having someone that could relate to me and that I could almost say anything to and be incredibly vulnerable with my grief, and he got it, was very helpful for me. But I'm also someone that just needs to talk about things to heal and to continue to grow. And so for a long time, obviously after my brother passed, nobody wanted to talk about anything. And so that caused me to feel so isolated for a while in my grief. And it kind of felt diminished in a way compared to theirs because they didn't want to talk about it. So I was like, well, if we're not going to talk about it, maybe it's not as real,
Right.
And then once my sister passed away, I will say my mom was very, very open when my sister passed about being able to, she needed to talk about her grief and her pain as well. So that was helpful because I was able to kind of talk about how I felt and she was able to share those feelings with me. But even when that happened, obviously after my sister passed away, it allowed me to realize like how I was able to go back and talk to my dad and siblings about grief.
Right.
And so when she passed away, it opened up the conversation for me and my other brothers to talk about Caleb. And we kind of got to re-grieve that together. And then the same with my dad. Like, I think my dad nowadays is much more open to being able to speak about it. I think it's still very hard for him. But it's made me get to the point where I'm not as scared to ask about it because I know in reality, talking about it is healing for me. But I think it's also healing for my family because I think they've all felt a little bit isolated. In the grief.
Yeah, you just touched on some very important things there, Gabby. That if we keep it inside, it does make one feel very isolated. I think it takes longer in the healing process, and we need other people to help us process it because sometimes just being able to talk about it with somebody else,
exactly,
you're having to process your feelings as you're sharing.
Exactly.
And sometimes they can reflect back what they're hearing you say. And I think the more we share our stories, the more we talk about it, I think that the better we heal. And I think it does shorten that healing process to some degree.
Right. And I will say it wasn't just, and I also had incredible friends as well. And my stepmom that, they haven't experienced that grief. But for me, it was just having someone, like you said, that would just listen to me talk. I didn't need them to relate to me. I didn't need them to understand it. I just needed to get it out and someone to hear it and be like,
right.
Like,
and not try to fix it.
Process it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, let's talk a little bit about your story. I mean, you shared with us a few minutes ago, just sort of generally, but what was that like for you trying to balance out your grief with your parents' grief? And trying to figure out how to process all of that and then start navigating it, because that's a lot. And for us guys, sometimes we're not as good with our trying to process our emotions and express those emotions as women are.
Yeah. So it's definitely different in the sense that growing up, like I said, having a brother who already had gone on to heaven, 5 years before I was even born, but I have his first name, right? So I took that on, and nobody talking about him. Just, like I said, a photo up on the wall, on the family wall, and your brother's in heaven and nothing else. I think it really hit as a teenager, parents getting divorced, starting to think about those questions of where's my brother? Why isn't he here? He should be here. I'm about ready to graduate high school. What would it be like with him here? And that caused a lot of, just a lot of, I don't know what the word exactly, but stress and almost, anxiety, maybe led to some depression through my early 20s until about 25. So I think that isolation, because nobody wants to talk. I mean, when you're in high school, nobody wants to talk about your brother who died. Yeah. I mean, it's being honest with you.
Oh, no.
Right.
No.
And nobody else, none of my siblings, nobody else wanted to talk about it. Yeah. So it was just holding it inside and almost, wanting to talk to somebody about it and release it, but no outlet anywhere in sight. Yeah. So it created, stress on the inside. Fortunately.
So how'd you deal with that, Bobby?
So probably not the best way. I mean, honestly, I think, like I said, I think it really led to, just some depression early on and like in college and stuff. Not severe, but just enough to where it was bothering me, and different family dynamics going on too. It was kind of growing up. It was really a struggle with our family as far as just, like I said, the divorce and just different things that were going on. So it was a combination of things. And I think my brother definitely struggled with it as much or more than I did. But I'll get to this. So I really think my mid-20s was where the shift came in. Not only was I always a Christian, but it really started to lean into that faith even more. And my wife, Amy, who, we married at, I think I was 21 and she was 20. She's a rock, right? Mm-hmm. So she is somebody who helped me not only during that time, but even when my other brother, Carl, died in 2020, it was 8 months of struggling for me. And my wife really came along, was very patient, but she also has the balance of being able to say, you've got to start taking some steps in the right direction, the positive direction, and the things that I knew were coming. I was waiting for her to say it, and hey,
a wise woman.
Exactly. You got your job, you got your kids, you've got these things going on that are just waiting for you to start engaging with them more. Because like I said, it's isolating. You feel like you're alone. Nothing's funny. Nothing's happy. Nothing seems important during that time.
No. Were you already in the military at that point?
I was. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so I'll just say too, at a recent Sibling Lifeline retreat, one of the young ladies there said, she made this statement, I'm living in my parents' grief. And that really resonated with both me and Gabby. Just knowing her story. But what I think about that is she had other siblings who were living, and, her sister had gone on to heaven. But what her point was is that, her parents were really just focused on heaven in the sense of, I want to be there. I want to be with my child, and not thinking about the living ones that are right here with them now. And I can only imagine what it's like to lose a child and how that must feel, right. how much you want to be with them again in heaven. But I think what she was getting at was her parents were so immensely focused that they felt left out of the picture. And hey, we'll just move on with our own lives and keep doing what we're doing and take care of each other. And for right now, at that point, a few years had gone by, and she didn't feel very, like the parents were giving her or her siblings the attention they deserved. So that's really stuck with me too.
That happens all too often because parents, in trying to figure out how to navigate life again without your child, it's easy for their death to kind of become the focus. Mm-hmm. Instead of, as believers, we know that we have hope in Jesus. And so Scripture even talks about, I think it's in, I can't remember if it's 1st or 2nd Thessalonians, we don't grieve like those who have no hope. Doesn't mean we don't grieve. It doesn't mean we don't hurt. And it doesn't mean there's no pain and that we're not sad. It just means that on our grief journey, that we have the hope that we do in Jesus, that we will see our child again if they were in Christ. And we have the hope of walking through life with his help, not trying to do it alone. And so we have a strength that's not ours, the strength that he gives us. But at some point, the focus has to shift back to life again. And that's where sometimes people can get stuck, whether it's the loss of a child or the loss of a sibling. All you think about is their death. the fact they're not here with you any longer. And it's like that's just all that your life is focused on. And that can be a very unhealthy place to be, especially if it's a place where you begin to live. So yeah, I understand and appreciate what that young lady was saying. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, Bobby. We just talked about how grief, the loss of a child in a family, it does change family dynamics. And sometimes it changes those dynamics dramatically. And the siblings who are left can feel left out. Sometimes they just feel totally isolated, like you guys said. And sometimes it also gives you a heightened awareness, I think, of your own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
When you lose somebody who you've kind of grown up with, or maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, but you're doing a lot of life together under the same roof with the same parents. What did you guys experience? What was it like for y'all?
Yeah, so I feel like, kind of going back to what I said a little bit earlier, like it kind of caused a little bit of delayed, not a little bit, years of delayed grief for me, as far as feeling like, like obviously I dealt with that grief for a while. But also when you kind of take on your parents' grief, it causes you to take on maybe some roles that you wouldn't normally take. So like, kind of living in that state of making sure my mom was okay and my dad was okay, and not wanting to share my own feelings kind of made me, obviously it isolated me a little bit. But I think also for a long time and a lot of years, after my brother passed away, people would tell me, oh, you seem like you're so much older than you are, or that you had to grow up fast, or things like that, which I think is true. And I think that speaks to the fact of like, it made me more aware of life and that time is precious and you don't know how much time you have. And especially with, time with people that you love. And it made me definitely have a deeper appreciation, obviously for the family that I do have living, and made me cherish those relationships with them even more. But I think I've also found a lot of comfort knowing that I will see my siblings again, is something that I have always focused on, knowing that this is not the end. And I think that has comforted me in the moments that seem scary and that I'm anxious. And something that I speak about too, that I personally struggle with, is kind of dealing with fear of the future, as far as kind of living in this state of, people dying around you. It's something I personally do deal with, and feeling like, you wouldn't be surprised if someone around you passed away, just because of the unfortunate circumstances of how my siblings passed away has caused some of that for me. But I find a lot of comfort in that, knowing that I will see them again, and knowing that God has a plan at the end of the day is truly comforting when I feel like that.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Bobby?
Yeah, I want to focus in on the heightened awareness of your own mortality. So for me, looking back, I believe that I was more compassionate growing up. Like my mom would always encourage me. She was very compassionate also. Look for that one kid in school, or, the person out at the grocery store that needed, that smile, or needed you to engage with them, whatever it may be. I was always encouraged to do that by my mom. And I believe that, that the death of my brother caused me to be more compassionate, to be more outward looking than inward looking. And so that just carried on through my life. And when my brother Carl passed away, I thought I was pretty compassionate. And just being honest with you, I just felt like it was a heightened sense of compassion going forward. The last 5 years, I've just been even that much more engaged. Like I said, with the volunteer opportunities, I'm looking for opportunities that have a positive impact, that have an eternal impact. And I don't mind the temporal. You got to enjoy life and still do the things. You look at the mortality, and it could be tomorrow, or it could be 35 more years from now that I have. I don't know. I really don't think about it nor care about it too much. I just care about the day. What is God bringing an opportunity for that day for me to execute for him? And so I'm more focused on the eternal impacts, the positive impacts, than I am just the run of the mill, day in, day out things. Like I said, those things are necessary, and I still enjoy, a good hike, or, whatever the case may be. But I really am more eternally focused, and I believe that the words and deeds show that.
Yeah. And it's amazing how when you go through something like that, it can either make you bitter or better, but we have to choose.
Yeah.
Life is all about choices. And so we can choose to let God use our pain and our loss to help other people. And that's what I see in both of you guys.
Yeah, something you threw out there, I think that's important, the choice, right? And I think we talked about this before. I talked about this in our retreat. 1 Kings chapter 19, talk about Elijah, right? So Jezebel put bounty on his life, right? And so he heads to the wilderness. He hides in a cave. God brings him the nourishment he needs. But at the end of the day, God asked him twice. He said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Right? And here's a man who, I'm a prophet, one who was on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus Christ, right? And he asked him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I believe that, like a lot of our attendees, a lot of us bereaved siblings, we're dealing with the grief. We're dealing with other things in life, anxiety, depression, all those things. But that's what I believe that we have to ask our own selves is, what are we doing here? How stuck are we in our grief or whatever we're dealing with in this moment? Is God calling you to move forward, not move on, but to move forward in that grief or whatever that is, fear, anxiety, depression, and not sit there in that state and become useless to him, because he has things for you to do. Just like Elijah, he went on and anointed the next king. And God's got something for you to do in your life. He has a purpose, and you have got to be willing to reach out and answer the call of, what am I doing here? It is time to take some steps forward and make some strides, not move on, carry that love with you of your loved one going forward and honor them in every way possible. But you've got to take some steps forward and do God's will while we have time to do it.
Yeah, that's so well said. And it is so accurate. I think so often about the reality of how Romans 8:28 actually works in real life. And you guys have just been describing that, how God uses everything together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. When you're going through that early acute season of grief, sometimes it's pretty hard to see what good can possibly come out of something so traumatic. But when I look at what you guys are doing now, and when I think about what you just shared, both of you, God's already doing that. Because you gave him your pain and your grief, you're letting him do something with it according to what his purposes are. Then he's going to bring good out of it, and he's going to bring good into the lives of other people who are going through something very similar as you guys. As you said, Bobby, it's about making a conscious decision and to move ahead, as you said. We don't move on. You don't ever get over the death of a loved one. Yeah, I know there's something that you want to add here, Gabby. I can feel it.
Well, I'm just trying to, it's something that Bobby mentioned as well. It's just like, and it's something hard that we say that me and him say all the time, but it really is true. Is unfortunately, we have both obviously lost siblings, but we wouldn't be the people that we are today if that would not have happened to us. And it is something that it's very difficult to talk about sometimes and to say, but truly, I don't think we would be nearly as compassionate or as understanding or as empathetic towards the people around us if we wouldn't have gone through something so heartbreaking. And so when I think about that, there's something also so beautiful in pain and the things that you can do with, unfortunate circumstances and the things that God does and can do through you in these circumstances that happen, where you can help bring some comfort and some peace, even though these things are so hard.
Absolutely. It means a whole lot more to someone else who's grieving when that attention and the comfort and the support come from somebody who not only can sympathize, but they can empathize because they've walked there before. I see these connections, how God puts together people like you guys who have been there, and now you're ministering to other siblings because you know how much it hurts and you know the impact that it makes on their lives. You could have chosen not to do that. It would have been easier to carry it on with your own lives and your own families, but you chose to do something better. And when we do that, it's amazing what God can do with just offering ourselves, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it goes along with a path of least resistance. There's times in life where it is, let's not make, reinvent the wheel. Let's not make life harder. Let's take this path.
Right.
So often the best things in life, the most beautiful most, impactful things that happen to us are because we did not choose the path of least resistance. We actually went through the hard times and, faced it head on. And sometimes, again, that makes us who we are, and we're better for it. And we become the better version of ourselves because we didn't skirt the hard things in life that, God wanted us to go through. And again, I'm not saying that just because you go through something harder or a tragedy makes you any better. I wish everybody could do that. No, I don't wish anybody to ever have to go through that at all. But I'm just saying, like you said, Greg, we make that choice to not choose that path of least resistance. Good things can come up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad that you guys were willing to step into it. And that if you're listening today and you're in that early season of grief, nobody wants to hurt. Nobody wants to face grief and all that does mentally and emotionally and physically. But it's something that we do have to walk through. Please don't choose to do it alone. And invite somebody in to your life to do that with you, whether it be a friend or a counselor, a pastor, whoever it might be. But please don't try to do it alone. I think you've heard that in this conversation, that this is when community really, really becomes important in your life, because this is when you need those people that you can call at 3:00 in the morning if you need to. And for those of you who are listening, maybe who haven't experienced the loss that we're talking about, but somebody who has. We all want you to understand that, it's not a difficult thing to do, to come alongside and support somebody who has. Sometimes it means you just show up. We're not looking for magic words, because there's nothing you can say that's going to fix the situation. There's nothing that you can say or do that's going to really just suddenly make us feel better. It's just the fact that you offered yourself. And if we want to talk, we'll talk. And if we don't, you'll see that too. And either way is okay. It's just knowing that somebody cares enough to step out and offer themselves. You guys agree with that?
Totally agree.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. I want to spend a few minutes talking about your ministry. But before we do, I want to ask you guys one more question. And we've talked about your faith. You guys have talked about your faith already throughout the conversation. But is there anything that you thought you knew about God before this trauma and devastation in your lives that you actually know now you didn't know about him before?
Yeah, so I'll start a couple things. I think a couple things that helped me along the way that I haven't mentioned yet is a couple books that I read. One was by Levi Lesko, Through the Eyes of a Lion. Just talking about his daughter's passing. Just a very perspective book that looked at the eternal view. The other book, My Jesus, by Ann Wilson, dealing directly with sibling grief, the loss of her brother in a car accident, and how she walked through that grief. Those were two books that really had a big impact on me. And then lastly, I want to share the story that definitely Carl was involved with. And this is really God showing his hand to me, even in, the height of a storm. So back in May of 2023, I have a son. My oldest son was diagnosed with a brain tumor back in 2013. I just kind of give you a little bit of backstory so you understand the significance of it. But it was a really stressful time. We were in Aurora, Colorado. He was having a brain biopsy. His tumor was growing, and he'd had one of these before, and it didn't. A lot of things didn't go right the first time. So just a stressful time for me and my family. I was over at the hospital with him in ICU in recovery after the surgery. And so my wife was coming over to change out with me. And she had mentioned, hey, over at the hotel where we were staying at, they were holding some type of, she just mentioned, some type of military, something going on with the military, So I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I needed a little bit of time to decompress. So I walked back over there to the hotel and went to their conference area. And I saw a lady that was on the phone. So I bypassed her and went to the next lady who was sitting at a table and just introduced myself and said, hey, I see that your name here is TAPS. I mentioned this earlier, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors for Military Members who have lost a military member. And got to talking about it. And I noticed they all have buttons on. And I kind of derived that those buttons were the person they lost in their life. And so I asked her, I said, would you mind telling me about, your person that has that picture there in your button? And she said, sure. And so the very first words she said where she said, he's my brother and his name is Robert Joseph. And she stopped there. And that's my first and my middle name. And so I told her, I said, that's my first and middle name. And just, just kind of looked at each other. And she asked me, she teared up and asked me if she could give me a hug. She came around the table, gave me a hug, and she went on to tell me about him. And I just told her, I said, kind of gave her a reason I was there that day. And I said, you know what? I said, God put me here. I'm joining TAPS right now. Let's do this. And so she was like, okay, let's get you signed up. And so I really gravitate toward it as a teenagers. And she said, we'll get you in contact with the director, and his name's Carl. And so that was just another one.
You're kidding.
Went on to tell her the story of Carl. And, both of our brothers, died by suicide and born same year. There's a lot of commonalities there. And so I signed up to be a TAPS senior military mentor that day. My wife signed up to be a volunteer that day. And we enjoyed a conversation when my wife got back from the hospital with Ann Keithley. There, she works for TAPS. Just a wonderful, amazing lady. And what I want to end with that with is just, again, in the midst of your storm, when things are stressful, may not even seem like they're going right, and I was, still with a lot of stress at that point, God shows up. And he shows up in amazing ways to let you know that your impact in this life is not done. And here's an opportunity, even when you're in the middle of dealing with this, to have a positive and eternal impact on others. And I'm telling you, those seminars that we do 2 a year, I've done them since, one of them suicide only related. Those, we cherish those weekends, get there on Thursday and leave on Sunday. The time we get to spend with those teenagers, get to meet the families in the evenings, have meals with them, just a wonderful organization and an opportunity to share the word with others and just have that meaningful conversation.
Man, that's important work.
It's a great time. I thank God every day that He opened that door for us.
Yeah. What a great story and opportunity. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Gabby?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the sense of community piece that you had kind of mentioned before. And so to me, really, I think my relationship, I've always had a relationship with the Lord my entire life. But I think after my sister passed away, I really leaned into it as far as really the comfort piece of it and really just trying to build my relationship with him. But I think the biggest thing I took away from that and have continued, too, is just how kind the Lord is. Even like Bobby was saying, in the midst of something, such a big storm and, your grief, that there's always a sense of comfort that the Lord gives you in that. And so like for me, going back to like whenever my sister passed away and feeling like there was no outlet or, there was really no community piece to that for me. There was no books that I felt like I had that really related to me, or YouTube videos or really anything that felt like it was, maybe age related to me or things like that. And so that's where, like I'm so grateful for Sibling Lifeline now, of having that sense of community for not only me, but for Bobby as well. And I know that how healing that has been for the both of us, just to be able to sit in a room full of people that understand your grief and you don't have to explain anything to them. And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned is just how kind the Lord is, and that He knew how much, I think that we both needed that sense of community in our lives, as far as like, other siblings that have gone through the same pain. And so that's been something that, has really impacted me over the last couple of months.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And, God created us for community.
Exactly.
I think it's just sometimes we don't realize how much so, or how much we need that until something like this happens. It's easy to kind of skate along sometimes and act like the Lone Ranger, especially for guys. But when something like that happens, that's when you really appreciate those people that God's put in your life.
Yes.
And it's in His wisdom and kindness, as you said, Gabby. He knew that about us when He created us. And so He gives us those opportunities. But again, it goes back to choosing. We have to allow other people into our lives to do community with. Now, for the moment that some of our listeners have been waiting for, let's talk about Sibling Lifeline and what it is that you guys are currently doing, what it is you offer to grieving siblings, and what your vision is going forward.
Okay, so Back in April of 2024, I just felt like God was laying on my heart to start Sibling Lifeline and to start the retreats. And so I approached, Brad and Jill and Larry and Janice here while we're waiting, and just laid out my vision to them. And they agreed that it was needed, and they loved it. And so we went forward with it, set a date for April of 2025 for the first retreat. Gave us some time for sure. We were definitely, eager to get started, but I'm glad we had the time to fully prepare and think about, what we're going to bring to the table for the attendees. And for me personally, I think, the last 5 years, especially, the volunteer opportunities that I've laid out, that really helped prepare me for, putting together what a retreat looks like. And so they show up on Friday, we give them a tour and, show them their room. I remember the first time I thought, well, we're going to have a icebreaker. We don't need an icebreaker. The supper is the icebreaker. They're eager to talk and get to know each other. And we share our stories that night, our sibling stories. And it's not just about their deaths, but it's more importantly, it's about how they lived. And then as the weekend progresses, we have a lot of grief activities before and after, pictures of our life before and after the death. We have emotion rocks that we pull out of a bag that we pass around that has all different kinds of emotions. We talk about those. We have letter writing to our siblings. We have topic times where, the registration form, what they put down as topics they want to talk about as siblings, we talk about those during the retreat. We have free time where, obviously they, are able to conversate, ride the ATVs, and, we play some catch, and, some people jump in the kayak on the pond, and we do all kinds of stuff, for a couple hours and just let them relax in the afternoon. We have devotion.
Yeah, it sounds like a good balanced time. Physical activity and sharing and relaxing and having a good time and having good food. And that sounds great.
Yep, our food's catered in from local restaurants. And also we have a chef here who prepares many of the meals. We've got devotions, one on Saturday night and one on Sunday morning, some praise. And we really talk about how we're going to honor and how we are and going to honor our siblings, going forward. And I'm telling you, I think one of the siblings put it better than either one of us could really say it. But she said at the end of that first retreat in April, she said, we came here as strangers, but we left as family. And just connecting, before they even leave here for the weekend. And like I told Gabby, this to me, especially after the first retreat, was the most impactful thing I've done with my life all year.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I love that you guys have kind of partnered with Brad and Jill Sullivan, as you referred to their ministry a moment ago, the While We're Waiting. And that is an incredible ministry.
Yes.
Kathy and I have gotten to meet them recently and both fell in love with them. We had them on our podcast just recently. As a matter of fact, their episode aired yesterday, and Kathy and I were on their podcast as well. So what an incredible ministry they have. And I've heard a lot about the facilities that that they have there that that you guys can offer your guests. So what's the cost to somebody who would attend one of your retreats?
So our cost is totally free to those that attend.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Absolutely love that you guys are able to do that.
Yeah, there's no way I could take money for this. Neither one of us could. Yeah. This is something we want to provide for the siblings at no cost, and all they have to do is get here and get back home transportation wise. And I just want to tell you, Gabby is the best co-facilitator you could ask for. She does such an amazing job during the retreat and really connects with our attendees, our siblings.
Yeah, I'll bet she does.
I'll say the same thing about Bobby. I also like to add too that he just said that I think is important is that just getting here and just coming in the door is like truly the most inspirational and bravest thing you can do. It's not even if you don't have to talk, you don't have to, whatever that looks like for you, but for you to even make the step to come in the door is so incredible in itself, because I think that that's the scariest part. Is walking in a building full of people that you don't know. But the beautiful thing about that is that we all share the same grief. And that has been something that's been really healing for both of us is, we hear siblings all the time and they're able to share things about their grief journey that we would have never thought of or been able to put into words. That has been, and every single time someone shares something, you're like, I've been there. I felt that. I've walked that. And I think that that's huge because sometimes, we don't know how to put our grief into words or into thoughts. And so to hear other people be able to do that and relate to it is incredible.
Yeah, that's one of the most important aspects of coming together like that, because it is amazing how when you come together with somebody else who's gone through the same trauma and loss that you have, it's like this instant bond, isn't it? You were strangers in a moment, but in the next moment, you're not.
Yes.
Would you share what you've been through and they share what they've been through? Yeah. And you hear the commonalities that, it's almost, you can almost predict what people are going to say because it's so universal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one thing we didn't just talk about is where these retreats take place. I know that the one that you guys are doing, when's the next one?
It's August 15th through the 17th. That one's full right now. And the next one is November 17th through the 21st.
And these are in Hot Springs, Arkansas at Brad and Jill's retreat, right?
Yes.
Yep. That is correct. They're, right now, they're all here. We've talked about maybe one in the future being somewhere else. For right now, they're all here. And one of the things I think, the connections here, you can walk the memory trail on the south side of this property. Right. They are parents' children's names up there, but there are also siblings' names up there. I know, when I was here when they were building this refuge, this beautiful place, there are siblings and child, names written on the studs there in the kitchen and dining room area of this refuge.
Wow.
So I think siblings really resonate with that, knowing how special this place is to parents and also for the siblings that get to attend these retreats. It's a very special place for all.
Yeah, it sounds like it. How can people get in touch with you guys?
So we have our website, which is siblinglifeline.org. And then we also have a Facebook page. I know that you kind of mentioned that earlier, Bobby. We have our Facebook page and then our Instagram page. And both of those are Sibling Lifeline as well.
Okay.
And then on the website, there is like a question, like on the bottom right, where you can like kind of submit questions and things like that.
Okay.
Where Bobby responds to those. So he sees those and is kind of able to help out with any information or anything like that.
Yeah, there'll be an email at the bottom, and then also if you want to text, I got my phone number out there too on the bottom. So email or text on the bottom of the website. Okay.
Now, and you mentioned a Facebook page. Do you guys have a private Facebook group that people can join? Is that what you're referring to?
So we have like an open Facebook page, which is Sibling Lifeline, and then we have a separate private one that is Sibling Lifeline Retreats. That one is specifically for other bereaved siblings that have come to our retreats so that going forward, they have that sense of community with other people that have been here that they can continue to reach out to as well.
Okay, that's great. Great. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add to this for people that are listening that maybe have just discovered that there's a resource out there that they previously didn't know about? Or did we pretty much cover what you guys wanted to?
Yeah, I think so for the Sibling Lifeline retreat part of it. Yeah, just going forward, we're going to serve as many siblings as there are out there that want to come to retreat. Like I said, we've got 3 scheduled for 2026. We're looking at possibly adding another one. We just want to be there for those siblings that need, that want to join us in that healing journey here and just provide that connection, like you said. I didn't realize how much that connection meant until that first night in April.
Yeah.
We were sharing our stories. I've shared my stories a number of times and became emotional when I was sharing my story with the other siblings who were there. And that's why. That was the first time I've ever looked out and looked in the eyes of everybody sitting across from me was a bereaved sibling and knew exactly what I was saying, every word of it. And that meant so much to me. And that's when, really for me, that connection really hit of this is something special. And I know that everybody felt the same way. And it was hard for everybody to leave that weekend and just to say goodbye. I think about, we talk about this often, but I can sit here, go through every chair in the living room and each person's name and remember their story. And that's just how much that weekend meant to us as facilitators. And I know it meant to them too. And all the future ones, we'd love to, whatever God's got in store, he'll deliver.
Yes, he will. He absolutely will. Well, Bobby and Gabby, it has been such a treat having you guys on our podcast, being our guests today and sharing your stories, but also talking about this ministry that you guys have just started within the last few months. So thank you for carving time out of your busy schedules to do that. We look forward to hearing more good things about Sibling Lifeline. For those of you that are listening, if you didn't have a chance to write any of that down, at the summary section of Bobby and Gabby's episode, you'll find a link to Sibling Lifeline so that you can check out for yourselves and find out additional information about the retreats. Guys, I appreciate so much what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And for those of you who are listening today, it has been such an honor to have these guys as our guests. And if this conversation was encouraging in any way, or if it brought you some hope, please let us know by clicking the link in the summary section of their episode. And the other option would be you could go to Apple Podcasts and just leave a review or a rating. We absolutely love feedback from our listeners. Otherwise, we will look forward to having you guys back in 2 weeks for a new episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.